In this video, I'm going to show you how to transform selections and shapes and images and other things inside of Photoshop, which is something pretty common that you'll want to do. Now, transforming basically means that we're just adjusting something based on its location, its rotation, or maybe its scale. So the easiest thing to show you is the image and how we can do that first, because that's something that you might want to do often. So if we go to the top menu bar and we click on image, not only can we change the image size or the canvas size, but we can also adjust the image rotation. Now, if we go ahead and select 180 degrees, it's going to flip this 180 degrees. Imagine if this was a sheet of paper and we spun it 180 degrees around. That file would start at the bottom left, go to the top left, and then end up at the top right. That's 180 degrees. So we can undo that, and we can also do something like a 90 degrees clockwise. So if this was a sheet of paper and we're looking at on a desk, we rotate it 90 degrees in the clockwards direction. And we can also do that in the counterclockwise direction so that it spins it the other way, depending on how you need that to happen. We can also do an arbitrary number, so we can punch in any angle that we would like. You can type in the angle, or you can click on the word and drag and it'll adjust it, which you can do that with a lot of different variables inside of Photoshop. By clicking on the word and dragging, it'll change the numbers for you. But if we did 45 in the clockwise direction and hit OK, you can see it would do that here. Now it has to fill in the rest of the canvas with something, so it just gave it a white background. So we'll undo that. Another thing you might want to do is you might want to just mirror this image. So if we want to flip this on the horizontal axis and put the 5 on the other side, there's times where that might be something you want to do. So we can go to image rotation and we can flip the canvas horizontally, and that'll do just that. It'll create a mirror. And we can also do that in the vertical. So if we do that, it'll flip it along the vertical axis, which is something else that you might want to do. So that's how we can do the image itself, but you can also control other things like selections and shapes and things of that matter, fonts, text, and what have you. So let's go ahead and just make a selection, and we can use a tool like the quick selection tool and just grab maybe this one die right here. And we gotta be careful, because if we bleed out into that beige color, we'll start selecting too much of the background. And this isn't perfect, but this will just kind of give you an idea of how we can maybe select this and then adjust it as needed. So now we have a selection of this die right here. Of course, we can use the move tool to grab that and move it around. Now we're going to see the white background, so this isn't going to be perfect. And there's ways around that we'll get into in the more advanced sections. But we can move that around, which is, of course, adjusting its location or transforming its location. Or we can go to the top and click on Edit, and then we have some transform tools. Now there's some in here that we won't go over right now, but we want to look at free transform and regular transform. Right now we'll just do a regular transform, and you can see all the different things we can do with this selection. Scaling makes it bigger or smaller. We can rotate it just like we rotated our image. We can skew it, distort it, give it perspective, warp it. And then we can also do the other things we did with the image, such as rotating it or flipping it. So let's just see what happens if we do the flip horizontal. You'll see that if we imagine a center going down this selection, it flipped it along the horizontal axis. I'll just undo that, and you can see if I undo and redo real fast what's happening there. Let's take a look at some of these other ones, such as scale. Scaling is going to allow us to make this bigger and smaller by stretching it or squashing it. So I might want to make this die, say, a little bit bigger. And I can stretch that out. And just like with creating a rectangle, you can hold down the Shift key and it'll constrain that to a square. So we can do that. And then if I want to save that, you can see the bounding box with the handles are still there. We want to go ahead and save this, so I can hit the enter button, and it won't get rid of my selection, but it'll save that scale. So now that's scaled up for us. It's bleeding over a little bit, so let's undo that. And another thing that you can do while you're transforming is not only can I scale this image, I'll hold Shift, but if I click in the center, I can actually move it also. So that's a quick way to make edits, is you can scale or warp or distort, and then you can also move. And you can grab any one of these handles. You can stretch it this way, or you can stretch it this way, or however you see fit. So I'm just going to hit enter to save that, but then we'll go ahead and undo that again. So we'll take a look at a couple of these other ones real quick, and we'll get more depth into all the transforms later on. But again, we can rotate, and now what happens is when we have these handles, we have this curved double arrow, which is basically the sign for rotation. And now what I can do is I can click and drag, and it will allow me to rotate that selection, and again hit enter, and it'll save that for me. I'll undo that. We also have the other rotations at the bottom, such as rotating 180 and rotating, say, 90 clockwise or counterclockwise. We'll take a look at one more here. We'll just look at the skew, and the skew is basically going to allow us to move these handles up or down or left or right, which skews the way the image looks. So when I go on the line in between the two handles, you can see that we have an arrow with two arrows beneath it going left and right, and if I click and drag, this is what the skewing does. It allows us to skew this image, which might be something you need to do. Or we can skew it, of course, on the vertical axis this way too. And again, I can always click in the middle and move that around at the same time too. We'll hit enter to save that. You can hit escape to get rid of it. Looks like Photoshop is trying to show us some tutorials here. So that is how we can transform a selection. Now you can also do a free transform, or by hitting Control T on Windows or Command T on macOS. And this will allow us to do all of those for the most part, especially the scaling and rotating, all in one go. So depending on where I have my mouse around this image, you can see the icons changing either to arrows to scale it, a single arrow in the middle to move, or rotation arrows. So here I can rotate, and then I can scale, and then I can move. And that's a free transform, allowing me to quickly do this. So that's a shortcut key that you'll probably want to remember and you'll use often is Control T or Command T for the free transform tool. I'm going to go ahead and undo that again and hit Control D or Command D to deselect that selection. And we can do the same thing with other things like shapes. So let's take a quick look at a shape here. If I go in and let's make a polygon tool, we'll just click one time. We'll change the number of sides to 5 and hit OK. And say this is a little small and we need to make it bigger. Well, we do it the same way. We can go to Edit, and instead of it just saying transform or free transform, it says transform path or free transform path. But it's essentially the same thing. So I can go to the free transform path here, and now I can scale this up. And of course it's stretching and squashing, so if I hold shift it'll stay uniform as it gets bigger. And then maybe I need to rotate that shape this way to get it in place the way that I want. And then I can go ahead and drop that where I like it. And of course I can move it around, and then I can hit enter to save that there. And of course, because it's a shape, it created a new shape layer over in the layers panel. So that is a brief overview of how you can do some basic manipulations with images and selections and shapes, something that is pretty common inside of Photoshop for you to edit your photos, or when you're working on your graphic design work, you can edit those shapes or edit those photos by rotating them, scaling them, or transforming them, or however you like.